Hey traders, welcome to Charts and Coffee. Good to see everyone here. We've got YouTube, our Simpler Essentials room. Shout out to those folks on Twitter. All right, so let's get to it. Good morning, good morning. We're taking a look at this Tuesday morning where at the top of the hour, so basically an hour from now, we're going to have a consumer confidence number. Not a lot of data being released today, not a lot of events on the schedule. So this is basically going to be a market where we will continue to see what kind of pullback SMH is going to, even QQQ could continue to have in the wake of Apple, NVDA. And maybe this is something we talked a little bit about in the Sector Secrets Mastery Room. Are we starting to see, and this would be early, but are we starting to see early signs of maybe some rotation? And the place that we've been focused on most is energy. So if you haven't been taking a look at possibly some energy rotation, especially with the strength in crude, do take a look at that, because I'm not necessarily a fan of just, a lot of folks like that sort of dividend reinvestment, longer term, never not at least have energy exposure type of approach, but that's a little bit more portfolio management. So remember, when we're traders, it's a different thing. We're going to be using timing in a different way than, say, a buy and hold or a portfolio manager. However, that being said, if crude oil can continue its ascent, we're starting to finally see some bullish momentum, some green trends, green candles, not quite a trend yet, but we're definitely seeing this ability for crude to stay above $80 a barrel, which is kind of a big deal. Now, if crude continues to do that, the way that would ultimately filter down is unleaded gas would continue to move higher. Heating oil, which is in a seasonally upswing, would continue to move higher. And oil stocks, XLE, OIH, they would benefit from that strength in crude. So much like when copper was in fuego, we like that metals and mining. If gold picks up, we like the gold miners. It's not that different relationship, but definitely keeping an eye on energy as we go into the end of this month, and whether or not we could see some strength in probably most notably OIH and XLE. XOP will need the continued help from natty gas. That's something that this looks better than crude oil in terms of strength. But remember, XOP is not only just a crude oil story; it's also a natural gas story. So it's on a singular commodity exposure. All right. That being said, as always, gang, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in. Let me know what you're either in. Let me know what time frame you're looking at. Not just a symbol, right? What else about it are you looking for? To get in, to get short, to take profit, etc. So let me know and we'll dive in. All right. First up, taking a quick peek at the S&P and the NASDAQ. They are, at least for now, looking to be holding from yesterday's pullback. At least the S&P is. There's our NAS. We did get long the QQQ calls into the close yesterday in the Sector Secrets Mastery, so we'll be looking for some strength there. All right, so think about what we did here. We took advantage of a pullback buy, right? And then that support level is where we're looking for the bid, the buyers, the demand, the floor to hold, and then a little bit of a rally from there. All right, along those lines, what is my take on Google? Well, on Goog, okay, for a long position. Fernando, so, if you've been watching this show for, maybe it's your first day, if you've been watching this show for any length of time, definitely you should know who's talking to you and giving analysis and how she trades. So if I'm looking at Goog, or even Google for that matter, definitely a far better uptrend than it was for most of June. This is true. But please remember, 90% of market participants, I haven't taken a tally, but it's pretty easy to see. 90% of market participants are momentum players, which includes buying with strength, buying at higher highs, buying after up moves. Not so coincidentally, 90% of market participants are also net losers. Maybe that's a coincidence. I don't know. But the way that I'm always going to look at what's happening is starting with the trend, then moving on to, based on the trend, structure dictates strategy. So then what's my strategy? So structure, strategy, and then what indicators would help me identify a better zone for that entry. So where Google sits right now, it's not a darn thing I can or even want to, frankly, do with it, right? If we think about Google, I'm going to show you Google, all right? Because that's 10, they're going to move the same, right, Fernando? So this is the way I think about Google. Take a look at the move on the 18th, where that green candle sunk down into that gray zone. The green is bullish, the gray is support. Did it again yesterday, briefly. Green is bullish, that gray is support. Now, do I want to buy after that move higher? Is there any suggestion that there will be traders that are willing to buy above that? If we have a trend, it's more likely. So if you're gonna buy into momentum, and again, I don't know if you're already in or not, but if you're gonna buy into momentum, you got to do it soon in that initial momentum move. Otherwise, what happens is if the initial momentum is done and then no one wants to buy above 180, well, then that's a very precarious place to be. So if we can pull back down to about 175, call it 65, I'm good with that. But it's got to pull back, because the pullback simply means that, think about an archer pulling back the bow, right? You pull back and then it goes forward. And that's the way I look at market behavior in that regard. And as far as NVIDIA goes, Louise, I'm looking at still a pullback happening on NVIDIA, but I'll tell you, I have very little interest in NVIDIA itself, but I'm very interested. Oh, who asked me about NVIDIA? Sorry. Good morning, Louise. Wayne, sorry. Wayne, on NVIDIA, I have very little interest in NVIDIA itself, but I am looking in that corner of the markets, the broader averages, because the semiconductor sector is still the number one weighted sector month to date and quarter to date. However, if we're going to see sector rotation, if we're going to see flow into energy and oil services, which we're starting to see little signs of on the coattails of the strength in crude oil, where is it going to come from? Where does money come from into the market? Either on the sidelines, right? Or profit taking is taken, right? And then that money is then bargain hunting. So you take profit and then you go shopping. And then that's a really basic way to say something that's oftentimes made to be a lot fancier than it is. That's sector rotation, right? Profit taking, bargain hunting. Something has been performing really well, and then we'll take that profit and buy something else that we expect to take the elevator up. If we're going to see that, it could be semiconductors, probably most specifically first. Again, I'm not saying that sector rotation means the trend is done. It simply means there'll be a little bit more pronounced profit taking. That being said, that puts NVIDIA in the crosshairs, Wayne. I like the buy in semis, don't get me wrong, but I'm not sure over the course of the next week what we could see. Because remember, we're talking about the last trading day of this month is Friday. The last trading day of this month, right, is Friday. We start July 1 on Monday. So if we're going to start to see that sector rotation, this is the week. Keep a really close eye on those outperformers, whether that be semiconductors, tech, communications, and to keep an eye on the bottom of your sort of alignment of strength to weakness on the sectors. And semis could get a little bit more of a pullback, and that's going to take NVIDIA with it. That's going to take Qualcomm with it. So yesterday, when given the choice between buying a pullback in semiconductors and buying a pullback in the NASDAQ, I went with the NASDAQ, only because right now, as we go into the last 4 trading days of this quarter of this month, if we're going to see that rotation, again, sector rotation it sounds so much fancier than it is. Remember, Wall Street's a lot like tennis, right? If anyone heard the way they devised the scoring system for tennis. They made it purposefully nonsensical and difficult to follow because they wanted to leave certain people out of the game. That's Wall Street, gang. They're tennis. I love the game of tennis. I'm just talking about the scoring. Same thing with Wall Street. What can we use an acronym? Can we use some nonsensical word and just keep people unsure about what it is that's going on? That's exactly what they do. So, what sector rotation? Profit taking, bargain hunting. Do I think that semiconductors can continue to outperform for the next 6 months, for the second half of the year? Or do I think something like energy, or do I think something like energy could start to, and it's early, it's still early, but if someone's out there looking for some bargain hunting on the coattails of crude, that's another way to look at it. So it might seem like a weird set of dots to connect NVDA to say Exxon. That's kind of where we're at. So do I want to be a buyer in semis? I'd rather do it next week. All right, next up, Home Depot. Tell you, the consumer discretionary and the home construction, home builders sectors have got to be something we got to look at. When I look at consumer discretionary, obviously it's Amazon, Tesla, Home Depot. But then we have ITB and XHB, where things like Home Depot and Lowe's are also weighted. In and of itself, yeah, I would keep an eye on Home Depot. And it's tough not to at least be looking at the ITB, XHB sectors with at least an eye to the upside. Not as much as we saw in Q1, but certainly an eye to the upside. Because if we are going to see lower rates, maybe that first cut comes September, maybe it comes November, but we are on schedule still, according to the Fed Fund futures, for a September, November, December cut or a November, December cut. And that could help out ITB and XHB. Otherwise, Home Depot is going to be tethered to the Dow. And of the indices, if you compare the big three, NASDAQ, S&P, Dow is still a laggard, right? Because we're punching up to all-time highs on the regular in the NASDAQ and the S&P on the heels, on the strength of tech and semiconductors. And tech and semiconductors are not as influential in the Dow as, say, financials are. So you can see if we're looking at the Dow, then that's where Home Depot would sort of fall in line with the index sector stock. So I'd be a little hesitant. I'd still prefer to focus on the overall uptrends. And that's always something, gang. Whether there's a narrative behind it or not, at the end of the day, I want to make sure as I'm going through all the sectors and indices and stocks that I would consider, am I exhausting all the uptrends first and then going to non-trending, but maybe bullish, or non-trending, but maybe bearish scenarios. All right, next up is Jay says the long bond, sure, entered the uptrend yesterday. Do I have any thoughts on that? I don't have an uptrend on the bonds on the daily. Maybe it's another time frame, but it is bullish. You can see here we had a single day where the uptrend tried to organize on the 13th of June, but most definitely, I'm with you, it's bullish. So my thoughts on a swing buy, I will say this: as long as you're buying as close to 119.07 as possible, I like it. If you're buying with the momentum up through 120, that's going to leave at least a gap between where price could ultimately find support, which is almost 1 full point lower, versus price actually really getting into a breakout scenario, which is just in front of 121. So again, not knowing the actual price, I would say the closer to 119, as you can see this Darvish support, this is all automatically drawn, so really easy to determine, right? So the closer we are to that lower yellow line or that gray zone, the better. Because look, this gray zone buy on the 17th, this gray zone buy on the 18th, heck, even this one on the 14th, what's really cool about buying in that gray zone is it gives you an initial choice, right? To either take profit at the gold zone or at the yellow upper resistance level of that Darvish. And that way, if we go back and forth in that range, you can go enter profit for as long as it's stuck. And as long as it doesn't break down, which would stop us out, if it ultimately breaks out, now we've got some really potential good momentum-based follow-through. So that would be the second leg, if you will, sort of the second stage of the life cycle of that trade. So that's where I'll look at a sideways market, which is really gorgeously moving inside the daily price movement ranges in that Darvis. So a well-timed buy, Jay. That could be a really good one. Okay, next up is Meta, sure. Okay, so Meta is one of the stronger names, as well as Google, by the way. Meta is one of the stronger names in the XLC, the communications sector. And yes, if Meta in this uptrend can come down to the gray zone, like it did on the 17th, we can get down to that gray zone. I'd be long calls. I'm a long call, long put trader. I don't do spreads. I don't do multi-leg strategies. I don't sell this and buy that and put on some kind of multi-leg position. Nothing wrong with it. That's just exhausting to me. But I do like a long call, long put. And if I have the confidence directionally, then why not? And so Meta is definitely a market that a symbol that I would say I have directional confidence in. It's just a matter of, like we just talked about before, waiting for that support level to be reached. And while we sink down into that support level, buying the call. Because really, what is that? We can call it a sale. We can visualize that. There's this thing that we like. It's a regular price. And when the regular price drops, it's a sale. Prime Day. I just got my Prime Day, I opened up my Amazon app and it's already starting to remind me that Prime Day is happening in roughly 3 weeks, right? We all love a sale. But it's an interesting ism. Wall Street's the one place they throw a sale and nobody comes. Or worse, they come back and return their stuff, right? That's the psychology around the stock market. It's its own thing. It is unique. Can you imagine going to the store and saying, gosh, this particular thing, this pair of shoes has never been more expensive. I better buy some before it gets more expensive. That's Wall Street, right? Oh my gosh, these pair of shoes are so cheap. Let me go return the ones that I already bought. That's really what people do with stocks. So if we can remember that most people who are engaged in active stock participation ultimately are net losers, it's a sad fact. But then we think about what they habitually do. And if I were to describe a friend who does that, you say, gosh, your friend needs some help shopping. And yet people do that in mass in the market. So wait for that pullback. Wait for that pullback. Things do come back. They do if healthy trends correct. All right, healthy trends correct. So I would keep an eye on Google. I would keep an eye on Meta. In fact, if we're taking a look at the XLC, which I still believe is the third strongest sector month to date, take a look at what looks good in this group. So Meta, Google. I tend not to trade Goog, but again, whichever one you prefer. EA, which is a stock not talked about much. We're already in T in the Sector Secrets Mastery, so you can put T on that list. And then Netflix. And Netflix is such an example. This is a great place to wrap up. Netflix is such a great example of what most traders do, and what I hope that maybe through Charts and Coffee, just consider another way and see if it works for you. So what happened? Netflix shot up, right, on the 18th, and it was still pretty strong on the 20th, and it shot up again on the 21st, right? So if you're a momentum trader and you're doing it sooner rather than later, well, think of 2 ways to do it. All those visits to the gray zone and the Darvis. You build your Netflix position, you could take profit at the top of the range. The best day for a momentum trader would have been the 14th because we're escaping this box, quite literally, this resistance. We're escaping that level. That's a really early good play on momentum. And take a look. 2 more sessions followed to higher highs. So if you get your momentum timing right, it can be done, but you got to get it right. Now, what most traders will do is they'll see this day up and they'll hem and haw and see that day up. And then finally, maybe on the 17th or 18th, they buy. And then all of a sudden, here comes the 24th. Those are tricky, those are tricky things. And that's why I say, find where the support is. If you want to be long, buy the sale, right? Okay, gang. With that being said, thanks so much for being here for Charts and Coffee. I will see you tomorrow, same time, same station. Be good to each other.